You're not worthy of any wolf." The words cut through the gathering like a blade of ice, and for a moment, Vivien Hartwell forgot how to breathe. Rain hammered against the stone courtyard of Silver Creek Pack Hall, turning the ground into a mirror of trembling reflections beneath the glow of lantern light. More than 100 wolves stood beneath covered walkways and decorated awnings, their faces turned toward the center platform where the mating ceremony had just ended. Vivien stood alone beneath the storm. Water soaked through her pale blue dress and clung to her skin as thunder rolled across the mountains in the distance. Across from her stood Caleb Mercer, the man who had been destined to be her mate according to every expectation of the moon goddess. His jaw remained rigid. His eyes never softened. "I reject you, Vivien Hartwell," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear over the rain. A ripple moved through the crowd. Some looked away. Others didn't bother hiding their satisfaction. Vivien felt her wolf retreat deeper inside her chest. Not dead, not gone, just wounded. The bond between them had never fully formed, but hearing the words spoken aloud still felt like watching a door close forever. Around her, whispers began immediately. "Poor thing. I heard he never wanted her. An omega with no future. What a shame." Vivien lowered her gaze to the rain-slicked stone beneath her feet. She had spent years preparing herself for many disappointments. But somehow she had never prepared for this. Not publicly. Not like this. Caleb stepped away without another word. His family followed. The ceremony attendants quickly began clearing the stage as if nothing important had happened. As if she had simply become another piece of forgotten decoration after the celebration ended. The music that had filled the courtyard earlier had already stopped. The laughter returned in scattered bursts among the guests. Life moved on with frightening speed. Everyone else seemed eager to forget she existed. A sharp gust of wind swept through the square, carrying the scent of rain and pine. Vivien wrapped her arms around herself. Her fingers trembled, not from the cold, from the effort of remaining composed. Tears threatened to rise, but she refused to give the crowd the satisfaction. She turned and started walking. No destination, no plan, just away. Away from the staring eyes. Away from the pity. Away from the feeling that her entire life had just collapsed beneath a storm-dark sky. The rain intensified as she left the village center. Wooden storefronts blurred past. Lanterns swayed overhead. Mud splashed against her shoes. Thunder cracked again, closer this time. Yet somehow the storm outside felt gentler than the one raging inside her chest. She reached the edge of town nearly 20 minutes later. Most sensible people had already taken shelter. The road stood empty except for sheets of rain blowing sideways across the forest path ahead. Vivien paused beneath a weathered sign, marking the boundary of pack territory. Beyond this point lay Blackwood Forest. Few wolves entered after dark. Fewer still entered during storms. Stories surrounded the woods. Old legends. Strange disappearances. Ancient territory once claimed by kings long forgotten. Tonight, she didn't care. She stepped forward. Rain drummed against the canopy overhead. Branches groaned in the wind. The deeper she walked, the quieter the world became. Soon even the sounds of the village disappeared behind her. Only thunder remained. Vivien followed a narrow trail she barely remembered from childhood. Her dress snagged on thorn bushes. Wet leaves brushed her arms. Every few minutes lightning illuminated the forest in brief flashes of silver-white light. During one of those flashes, she noticed something ahead. A faint glow. Warm. Golden. Not moonlight. Not lightning. A light. She slowed. The glow appeared again through the trees. Curiosity pulled her forward. The trail curved around a cluster of towering pines before opening into a small clearing. There, standing alone against the storm, was a cabin. It looked older than anything she had ever seen. The structure sat beneath enormous oak trees whose branches shielded part of the roof from the rain. A single lantern burned beside the front porch. Vivien frowned. Someone lived here. Or had recently. She hesitated. Every lesson she'd ever learned told her to leave. Yet another crash of thunder shook the sky above her. Rain poured harder. Water dripped from her hair into her eyes. She looked back toward the endless darkness behind her. Then toward the cabin. Shelter won the argument. Vivien climbed the wooden steps and reached the door. Her hand hovered over the handle. Something felt strange. Not dangerous exactly. Just different. like standing at the edge of a story she wasn't supposed to enter. Another gust of wind rattled the windows. Taking a slow breath, she pushed the door open. Warm air greeted her immediately. The scent of cedarwood drifted through the room. A fire crackled softly inside a stone fireplace. Yet there was no sign of the owner. Vivien stepped across the threshold and quietly closed the door behind her. Outside, the storm continued to rage across the mountains. But somewhere far beyond the forest, unseen by anyone, another storm had already begun. And before dawn arrived, both storms would collide. The cabin should have felt comforting. Instead, it felt like a question waiting to be answered. Vivien stood just inside the doorway, her hand still resting against the old wood as rain rattled across the roof overhead. The fire in the stone hearth burned steadily, casting golden light across the room. Someone had stocked fresh firewood beside the fireplace. A kettle rested above glowing embers. A thick wool blanket lay folded neatly on a nearby chair. Everything suggested the owner had only stepped away for a short time. Yet the silence remained complete. Vivien swallowed uneasily. Her wolf stirred beneath her skin, not with fear, but with awareness. Something about this place felt alive. She slowly removed her soaked coat and draped it across the back of a chair. Water pooled beneath her boots as she crossed the room. The warmth from the fire immediately eased some of the chill that had settled into her bones during the walk through the forest. For the first time since the rejection ceremony, she allowed herself to breathe deeply. The scent of cedarwood mixed with smoke and rain. It reminded her of childhood winters before life had become complicated. Before expectations. Before disappointment. Her eyes wandered around the cabin. A large bookshelf occupied one wall, filled with worn volumes whose titles had faded with age. Several maps covered a nearby table. Most depicted territories she did not recognize. A dark coat hung beside the door. It looked expensive despite its simplicity. The owner clearly was not an ordinary woodsman. A sudden crack of thunder shook the windows. Vivien flinched. Outside, the storm seemed determined to tear apart the entire forest. Lightning flashed through the glass, briefly illuminating the trees beyond. That was when she noticed something unusual. Fresh tracks crossed the mud outside the porch. Large footprints. Recent. Very recent. Her stomach tightened. Whoever lived here might return at any moment. Common sense told her she should leave before that happened. Yet one glance toward the storm outside erased the idea immediately. She would not survive another hour wandering through the forest in weather like this. The fire popped softly behind her. Vivien moved closer and extended her hands toward the warmth. Exhaustion settled over her shoulders. The emotional weight of the evening returned the moment she stopped moving. Caleb's voice echoed inside her memory. The crowd. The whispers. The pity in people's eyes. She closed her eyes briefly. Why did rejection hurt so much even when she knew it was coming? Why did humiliation linger longer than rain? A small sound interrupted her thoughts. Not from outside. From upstairs. Vivien froze. The cabin had a second floor. She had not noticed the narrow staircase tucked into the corner. The sound came again. A floorboard creaking. Then silence. Her pulse quickened. Someone was here. She stared toward the staircase, barely breathing. Seconds passed. Nothing happened. No footsteps followed. No voice called out. The silence returned once more. Perhaps the storm had shifted the old wood. Perhaps she was imagining things. Still, the uneasy feeling remained. Vivien slowly backed toward the chair nearest the fire and sat down. The warmth wrapped around her like a shield. Her eyelids felt heavy. She had not realized how exhausted she truly was. Between the ceremony, the storm, and the long walk through the forest, every part of her body demanded rest. Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains again. Somewhere deep within the forest, far beyond the cabin walls, a distant howl rose into the storm before vanishing into the wind. Vivien opened her eyes. The sound sent an unexpected shiver through her chest. It was not a cry of anger. It sounded lonely, ancient, searching, and for reasons she could not explain, it felt as though that lonely voice was searching for her. More than 20 miles away, the storm swallowed the towers of Blackthorne's citadel beneath curtains of rain and darkness. Most of the kingdom slept unaware that something was wrong. The guards remained at their posts. Servants moved quietly through empty halls. Fires burned behind stone walls. Everything appeared normal. Yet deep within the highest level of the fortress, tension gripped every room. No one spoke above a whisper. No one dared relax. King Damian Blackthorne was gone. Lord Rowan Pierce stood beside a rain-streaked window, staring into the night. He had served Damian for nearly 15 years. He had witnessed wars, political disputes, harsh winters, and difficult treaties. Nothing worried him more than nights like this. Any sign of him, he asked. A younger guard shook his head. No, sir. The trackers lost his trail near Blackwood Forest. Rowan closed his eyes briefly. That was exactly what he feared. Damian only disappeared during the worst periods. The times when the strange condition that had haunted him for years became impossible to ignore. Most of the kingdom knew nothing about it. Rumors existed, of course. Some whispered that the Alpha King carried an ancient curse. Others claimed the moon goddess had marked him for a destiny too heavy for ordinary wolves to understand. The truth was simpler and far more dangerous. There were times when Damian's senses became overwhelming. Every sound too loud. Every scent too powerful. Every emotion amplified until even being near other wolves became unbearable. During those periods, isolation was the only thing that helped. And lately, the episodes had been growing worse. Back in Blackwood Forest, rain continued to drum against the cabin roof. Vivien sat near the fire, unaware of the concern spreading across the kingdom. Her eyes drifted closed despite her efforts to remain awake. The warmth felt comforting after hours in the storm. Somewhere above her, another floorboard creaked. She looked toward the staircase again. Still nothing. The cabin remained silent. Yet the feeling of being watched lingered. Not in a threatening way. More like the forest itself was paying attention. Outside, wind howled through the trees. Then another sound emerged beneath it. Footsteps. Vivien immediately sat upright. Her heart skipped. The footsteps approached slowly through the rain. Heavy. Deliberate. Close. She rose from the chair. Every instinct urged caution. Water dripped from the edge of the roof outside. The porch steps groaned softly. Someone had reached the cabin. Her pulse quickened. The handle turned. Vivien froze. The door opened inward. Cold air swept inside along with the scent of rain, pine, and something else. Something wild. A tall figure stood framed against the storm. Dark hair clung to his forehead from the rain. A black coat hung heavily from broad shoulders. Water streamed from the fabric onto the floorboards. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The stranger's silver eyes landed on Vivien. The moment his gaze met hers, something changed. His entire body became still. Not ordinary stillness. The kind that happens when someone unexpectedly finds exactly what they were searching for. Confusion flickered across his face. Then disbelief. Vivien felt her breath catch for reasons she could not explain. The room suddenly seemed smaller. The air warmer. The stranger stared at her as though she had appeared from a dream. Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains once more. But inside the cabin, another storm had just begun. The stranger remained motionless in the doorway while rain poured behind him like a curtain of silver. Vivien could hear the water dripping from his coat onto the wooden floorboards. Yet he seemed completely unaware of the storm. His attention remained fixed on her. The silence stretched for several seconds. Long enough to become uncomfortable. Long enough for Vivien to wonder whether she should say something first. Then the stranger blinked, as though returning from a distant thought. A strange expression crossed his face. Relief. It appeared only briefly before disappearing beneath careful control. I did not expect anyone to be here, he said quietly. His voice was deep and calm, carrying the faint roughness of someone who had spent hours speaking to no one. Vivien swallowed. I am sorry. The storm became too strong. I found the cabin and thought it was abandoned. The man stepped inside and closed the door behind him. The howl of wind immediately softened. Warm firelight illuminated his features more clearly now. He looked older than her by several years, perhaps early 30s. His face carried sharp angles and quiet confidence. Yet there was also exhaustion there, the kind that sleep alone could never fix. You have nothing to apologize for, he said. No one should be outside in weather like this. Vivien relaxed slightly. At least he did not seem angry. The stranger removed his rain-soaked gloves and placed them beside the door. As he moved deeper into the room, Vivien noticed something unusual. The tension she had sensed the moment he entered had not disappeared. If anything, it had intensified. It was not fear. It felt more like standing near powerful electricity before a storm. Invisible, yet impossible to ignore. The stranger suddenly stopped walking. His eyes narrowed slightly. He inhaled. Once. Slowly. The reaction was subtle, but Vivien noticed it immediately. Something had captured his attention again. For a brief moment, confusion flickered across his face. Then astonishment. The man's gaze shifted toward the fireplace before returning to her. He looked almost unsettled, as though a puzzle he had spent years trying to solve had unexpectedly appeared in front of him. Meanwhile, several miles away, riders pushed through the storm beneath flickering lantern light. Lord Rowan Pierce led the search party personally. Rain soaked through every layer of clothing. The horses struggled against muddy trails. Still they pressed forward. The tracks continued toward the northern forest, one guard called. Rowan's expression darkened. Then we continue. Back inside the cabin, the stranger approached the fire. The warmth illuminated droplets of rain still clinging to his dark hair. He extended one hand toward the flames. For the first time since entering, his shoulders seemed to relax. Vivien noticed it immediately. Whatever burden he carried appeared lighter now. Easier somehow. The stranger noticed her watching. A faint smile touched his lips. Small. Almost reluctant. "My name is Damian," he said. Vivien hesitated before answering. "Vivien." The moment she spoke her name, something changed again. Damian lowered his gaze briefly. His jaw tightened. Not with anger. With emotion. Deep and unexpected. His wolf, silent for days beneath relentless inner turmoil, had finally stopped pacing. For the first time in years, the storm inside him had quieted, and every instinct he possessed pointed toward the woman standing beside his fire. The storm continued without mercy outside, but inside the cabin the atmosphere had changed. The restless tension that had followed Vivien through the forest seemed to loosen its grip, if only slightly. Damian moved toward the small kitchen area and placed a kettle over the fire. The simple action felt strangely normal, almost comforting. Vivien watched him from across the room. Most men she had met spent every conversation trying to prove something. Strength, status, importance. Damian did none of those things. In fact, he seemed far more interested in avoiding attention than attracting it. "You live out here alone?" she finally asked. Damian glanced toward the rain-covered windows. Most of the time. His answer was truthful without revealing very much. Vivien almost smiled. "That sounds lonely." For a brief second, something flickered in his silver eyes. Sometimes it is. The honesty surprised both of them. The kettle began to hum softly. Damian poured hot water into 2 cups and handed one to her. The warmth immediately spread through her chilled fingers. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You are welcome." The fire crackled between them. Outside, another burst of thunder rolled across the mountains. Vivien stared into her cup. Normally she avoided speaking about herself. Tonight felt different. Perhaps because this stranger knew nothing about her. Perhaps because she would likely never see him again after the storm passed. "I was not planning to be in the forest tonight." Damian looked up. "No." She forced a small laugh. "I was supposed to be attending a celebration." The words tasted bitter. Damian remained silent, giving her space to continue. "Instead, I became the reason people were celebrating." A shadow crossed her face. "Someone rejected me." The confession hung in the air. She expected pity. She hated pity. But Damian's expression did not change. He simply listened. "Then he was a fool," he said. Vivien blinked. The response came so quickly that she almost thought she had imagined it. Damian looked away toward the fire as though surprised by his own words. Yet he did not take them back. Something warm settled unexpectedly in Vivien's chest. Not because of the compliment. Because of how naturally he had said it. As though the conclusion required no debate. Across the room, Damian fought a different battle entirely. Every instinct inside him remained focused on Vivien. Her scent drifted through the cabin, gentle and impossible to ignore. Yet what unsettled him most was not the attraction. It was the peace. For months, his thoughts had felt like a storm trapped beneath his skin. Tonight, sitting across from Vivien, the storm had quieted. His wolf was calm, content. Listening to her voice felt easier than breathing. Damian had spent years searching for explanations to problems no healer could solve. Yet somehow this rejected Omega had walked into his cabin and accomplished what no one else ever had. Vivien shifted in her chair. "You keep looking at me like you were trying to solve a mystery." Damian's gaze lifted to hers. A faint smile touched his lips. "Maybe I am." For the first time that night, Vivien laughed. The sound was soft, genuine, and completely unexpected. Damian felt something inside him settle into place. Outside, the storm raged on. But neither of them noticed that the distance between their chairs had become much smaller than before. Hours seemed to pass without either of them noticing. The storm outside continued its endless conversation with the forest, but inside the cabin time moved differently. The fire burned lower, casting softer shadows across the walls. Vivien sat with her legs tucked beneath her chair, her empty cup resting in her hands. Somehow, she had told Damian more about herself than she had told anyone in years. Not every detail, not every scar, but enough. Enough for him to understand the weight she carried. Do you ever feel like everyone already decided who you are before you had a chance to become someone else? She asked quietly. Damian leaned back in his chair. The question seemed to strike something deep inside him. Every day, Vivien studied him carefully. You say that like you know exactly what I mean. A faint smile appeared on his face. Maybe I do. She noticed the sadness hidden behind the words. It was subtle, easy to miss, but it was there. For the first time, Vivien realized that whatever burden Damian carried was far heavier than loneliness. There were moments when his eyes drifted toward the dark windows as though he expected trouble to appear at any second. Moments when tension returned to his shoulders without warning. Moments when he looked like a man carrying responsibilities too large for one person alone. You do not have to tell me, she said softly. But whatever you are running from, it must be exhausting. Damian stared into the fire. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he released a slow breath. Sometimes people think power solves everything. Vivien waited. But the truth is that power often creates problems nobody else can see. The words sounded personal. Very personal. Yet before she could ask more, he shook his head slightly and changed the subject. Your family, were they there tonight? The question caught her off guard. Vivien lowered her gaze. No. Her voice became quieter. My parents passed away several years ago. Damian's expression immediately softened. I am sorry. She nodded. After that, it became easier for people to decide my future for me. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The cabin suddenly felt even more isolated from the rest of the world. Safe somehow. Vivien had spent years feeling invisible. Yet sitting across from Damian, she felt seen in a way that made her chest ache. He listened when she spoke. He remembered details. He looked at her as though her words mattered. The realization frightened her more than she wanted to admit. Across the room, Damian experienced a similar conflict. Every instinct urged him to remain cautious, to keep his identity hidden, to leave before sunrise and never complicate her life. Yet each passing minute made that decision harder. His wolf had already made its choice. It recognized something his mind still struggled to accept. The peace he felt near Vivien was not temporary. It was not coincidence. It felt like destiny quietly stepping into place. Suddenly, a distant sound carried through the storm. Hooves. Faint but unmistakable. Damian's head lifted instantly. Every muscle in his body became alert. Vivien noticed the change immediately. What is it? She asked. Damian moved toward the window and looked into the darkness beyond the trees. Far away, lantern lights flickered between the branches. Search riders. Getting closer. And for the first time that night, Damian realized their peaceful isolation was about to end. The lantern lights grew brighter between the trees with every passing minute. Vivien stepped beside Damian and tried to see through the rain-streaked glass. At first she could make out only shifting shadows. Then the shapes of riders emerged from the darkness. Several horses moved carefully through the storm, their lanterns casting pale circles of light across the forest floor. Are they looking for you? She asked. Damian did not answer immediately. His silence gave her the answer anyway. Something tightened in her chest. She glanced toward him. The calm man who had shared tea beside the fire seemed different now. Not frightening, not cold, simply focused, like someone accustomed to making difficult decisions. Outside, voices drifted faintly through the wind. The riders were spreading out, searching. Vivien suddenly remembered the old stories about Blackwood Forest. Hidden roads, royal patrols, secret hunting grounds. The realization made her stomach flutter. Who exactly was Damian? Before she could ask, another sound echoed from the opposite side of the cabin. More horses, more voices. Damian's expression darkened. That should not be possible. Vivien moved to the second window and immediately froze. 3 riders had emerged from the southern trail. She recognized one of them instantly. Caleb Mercer. Her former mate sat atop a dark horse, rain dripping from his cloak as he scanned the forest. 2 pack members rode beside him. "What is wrong?" Damian asked quietly. Vivien stared at the window. "Someone found me." Damian followed her gaze. The temperature inside the room seemed to drop. Not because of anger, because everything suddenly became complicated. Caleb urged his horse forward. His voice carried faintly through the storm. "Vivien." She flinched. Hearing her name spoken by him felt completely different now. Empty, distant, as though the bond she once imagined between them had never existed at all. "Why is he here?" Damian asked. Vivien laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. Maybe he realized embarrassing someone in front of an entire pack looks bad. Outside, Caleb called her name again. Damian's jaw tightened. Something protective stirred inside him before he could stop it. He had spent years controlling every instinct. Tonight those instincts refused to listen. Vivien looked toward the door. "I should go speak to him." "No." The answer came instantly. Both of them looked surprised. Damian released a slow breath. "You do not owe anyone an explanation tonight." The words settled over her like a blanket. No one had ever said something like that before. Most people expected her to apologize, to justify herself, to make herself smaller for their comfort. Damian expected none of it. A knock suddenly echoed through the cabin. Firm, controlled. Vivien's heart jumped. The knock came again. Then a voice followed. "Vivien, I know you are in there." "Caleb." Rain hammered against the roof. The fire crackled softly behind them. Damian stepped forward without taking his eyes off the door. For several seconds the entire cabin seemed suspended between 2 worlds. The quiet, refuge they had shared all night, and the reality waiting outside. Another knock sounded. Stronger this time. Vivien looked at Damian. Damian looked at the door. And neither of them realized that several hundred yards away, Lord Rowan Pierce had finally spotted the cabin as well. By sunrise, secrets that had remained hidden for years would no longer belong to the darkness. The knock came a 3rd time. Then silence followed. Not the peaceful silence that had filled the cabin earlier, but the kind that made every heartbeat feel louder. Vivien stood frozen beside the fireplace while rain drummed against the roof. Outside, Caleb waited. Somewhere beyond the trees, more riders were approaching. And beside her stood a man she suddenly realized she knew almost nothing about. Damian reached for the door handle. "Whatever happens next," he said quietly, "do not let anyone make you feel small again." Vivien stared at him. The sincerity in his voice caught her completely off guard. Before she could respond, he opened the door. Cold air swept inside. Caleb stood on the porch, rain soaking his dark cloak. Relief flashed across his face when he saw Vivien. Then his expression changed the moment he noticed Damian standing beside her. Suspicion quickly replaced relief. "Vivien," Caleb said, "you need to come back with us." Vivien folded her arms. "Why?" The simple question seemed to surprise him. "Because people are worried." She almost laughed. No one was worried a few hours ago. Caleb looked uncomfortable. Behind him, the 2 riders exchanged nervous glances. The storm seemed quieter now, as if even nature was listening. "The pack is talking," Caleb admitted. Leaving during the ceremony created problems. Vivien felt something inside her settle. There it was. The truth. Not concern. Not regret. Reputation. Damian remained silent beside her, but she could feel his attention fixed on every word. "I do not belong to the pack's reputation," Vivien said calmly. Caleb's jaw tightened. "Vivien, please." Before either of them could continue, another group of riders emerged from the darkness. Lantern light illuminated the forest path. The horses stopped immediately when they reached the clearing. Lord Rowan Pierce climbed down first. The moment his boots touched the ground, his eyes found Damian. Relief flooded his face. "Your Majesty." The words seemed to freeze the entire world. Rain continued falling. Wind moved through the trees. Yet no one spoke. Caleb stared at Rowan, then at Damian, then back again. His face lost all color. The 2 riders behind him immediately lowered their heads. Vivien blinked. Her mind struggled to process what she had just heard. "Your Majesty." Damian closed his eyes briefly as though hoping to avoid this exact moment. When he opened them again, there was no hiding left. Rowan stepped forward and bowed respectfully. Every rider followed. The clearing transformed in an instant. The mysterious stranger from the cabin disappeared. In his place stood the Alpha King. Vivien looked at Damian. Damian looked at her. Of all the reactions he expected, disappointment frightened him most. Instead, she simply looked stunned. Then something extraordinary happened. Damian stepped away from the doorway and crossed the rain-soaked porch. Before hundreds of assumptions, titles, expectations, and traditions could stand between them, he lowered himself onto one knee in front of Vivien Hartwell. The clearing fell completely silent. Even Rowan looked shocked. Damian lifted his gaze to hers. "The moon did not bring me here to save you," he said softly. "It brought me here to find you." And for the first time in her life, every person watching saw Vivien exactly the way destiny had always intended. For several seconds, nobody moved. Rain fell softly through the clearing as though the storm itself had finally grown tired. Vivien stood on the porch, staring at the Alpha King kneeling before her. The same man who had shared tea beside the fire. The same man who had listened when no one else cared to listen. The same man who had looked at her as though she mattered long before anyone revealed his title. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear the rain. Around them, every rider remained frozen. Caleb looked completely lost. The confidence he carried during the ceremony was gone. In its place stood a man realizing he had misunderstood everything. Damian slowly rose to his feet. His silver eyes never left Vivien. There was no command in his expression, no expectation, only honesty. "You should know the truth," he said quietly. "When I arrived at this cabin, I was not searching for a queen. I was searching for peace." Vivien felt her throat tighten. Damian glanced toward the dark forest surrounding them. "For years I believed some burdens could only be carried alone. Tonight proved I was wrong." The words settled over the clearing. Even Lord Rowan lowered his gaze respectfully. Vivien remembered every conversation beside the fire, every moment of unexpected kindness, every time Damian had listened instead of judging. The title Alpha King suddenly felt less important than the man himself. A faint glow began appearing behind the clouds overhead. Dawn was approaching. The endless storm that had dominated the night was finally beginning to break apart. As the first rays of morning touched the horizon, golden light spilled through the forest. The rain slowed, then stopped. Water shimmered on every branch and leaf. The entire world seemed transformed. Damian stepped closer, not enough to pressure her, just enough to let her know she was no longer standing alone. "Vivien Hartwell," he said, "you do not owe me an answer today. You do not owe anyone a decision. But I would like the chance to know what comes next." Tears threatened to rise in her eyes. Not from sadness, from relief. For one night, she had stopped running. For one night, she had been allowed to simply exist without proving her worth. And somehow that had changed everything. Behind her, the cabin door swayed gently in the morning breeze. Ahead of her stood a future she never imagined possible. Vivien looked toward Caleb one final time. There was no anger left, no desire for revenge, only clarity. Some doors closed for a reason. She turned back toward Damian. A small smile touched her lips, the first genuine smile she had worn in a very long time. Around them, the forest seemed to exhale. Birds began singing from the treetops. Sunlight filtered through the lingering mist. Lord Rowan smiled quietly to himself. The kingdom had spent years searching for something capable of bringing peace to its king. No council had succeeded. No healer had succeeded. No prophecy had offered answers. Yet destiny had arrived in the form of a rejected Omega walking alone through a storm. Damian offered his hand. Vivien looked at it for only a moment before placing hers in his. Warmth spread through her chest. Steady, certain, real. Together they stepped off the porch and into the morning light. Behind them, the storm belonged to yesterday. Ahead of them stretched a road neither could fully see. But for the first time, neither would walk it alone. And as the rising sun illuminated the forest, one truth became impossible to ignore. The moon had never rejected Vivien Hartwell. It had simply been saving her place beside a king.